All right. Everybody hear me okay? Everybody in the back, left, right, center, everybody good to go? My name is Doug Hogue. I'm a certified journeyman farrier with the American Farriers Association. And the lecture today is entitled The Wrangler Study of Biomechanics. It's a conversational piece. This was something that I was asked to write for the No Hoof, No Horse magazine. Y'all remember when that thing was rocking? Y'all remember that? So the idea behind it was simply just to excite people, get them motivated about education, and get them kind of off the back end of their seats and moving forward. And so that's what this is about. Is there any questions about what we're doing here today? So like, I'm the dancing chicken on the stage, and those guys down there are my examiners, right? So hopefully we can get this done and get my EE done. If you have any questions, hold them off to the very end. I will also cite my references, and you guys have any questions about that. I can also publish this whole thing so that you can go back and read my references if you have any questions about that. Rock it along. Socrates, born 2,400 years ago. Now you might be asking yourself, like, why am I bringing up these really, really old dudes? Well, what I'm wanting to do is establish the fact that biomechanics and the stuff that we all scratch our head on today has been around for a very, very long time. 2,400 years ago, Socrates stated that we cannot begin to understand the world around us until we understand our own nature. He also said that we need to study the other creatures around us so that we can better understand their nature. So that was 2,400 years ago. Aristotle, considered by many to be the very first biomechanician, he wrote the first book on it called De Motu Animalium. Now, not all of you are as fluent as I am in ancient languages, because I'm awesome at it. It means the study of movement of animals is what it means. I had to look it up. Okay, so Aristotle. Do you know what Aristotle and Socrates have in common? Anybody? Both students of Plato. Galilean, or Galilean, when you look him up, it does a bunch of different things. He gave us his work on the usefulness of the parts of the body. Leonardo da Vinci, many of us know him as an artist, but he spent a lot of time working on muscles, trying to learn about muscles and how they work along lines linearly, right? That's what he gave us his work on. You guys have seen the pictures and the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci, like, with like the horse and the human body when he's out like that. When you look at that, notice how much detail he puts into the actual muscles and origins and insertions. And Leonardo, I almost said DiCaprio. Leonardo da Vinci, he really worked diligently in his drawings to make sure that he highlighted as best he could origins and insertions. And for those of us that know anything about muscles, we know that it's super important because the origin and insertion of that muscle actually dictate its function, correct? We understand that. So here we get to Galileo Galilee, and it's important that we come to this guy because he is the reason why I've entitled this lecture, The Wrangler. So Galileo Galilee was the son of a lutenist. I had to look that up because I didn't know what it was. It's an instrument. He was one of 6 or 7 children, depending on what book you read, because it kind of differs right there. He was a really intelligent guy, grew up, and he wanted to go to the University of Pisa to become a doctor. Anybody taking over-under on me falling off of this at any time? Any over-under on this? So he went to the University of Pisa, right? And he got kicked out of medical school. He got kicked out of medical school because back in these days, you have to understand, it was like, oh, I have a headache. And they're like, man, take a gallon of blood out of this dude. That'll fix it, right? So Galileo Galilee was like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. You shouldn't do that. So then he got nicknamed the Wrangler. Now it sounds way cooler in Latin when they say it, but that's what it meant, was the Wrangler. And they called him this because he got kicked out because he just would not accept things as they were just being told to him, right? They needed to be proven. And so he actually came up later in his life with something called the scientific method. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the scientific method. And do we know what that means? It means that for it to be considered a fact or proven, it must be able to be replicated, correct? So if I grab this right here and I drop it on the ground, we know without a shadow of a doubt, in this environment, this will fall, right? We know that. And we can replicate it with your phone, and we can all throw up our phones right here, right? And it'll always fall, so we know that it's a fact. Does that make sense? Kind of a silly fact. He could never accept anything his professors had to say on faith alone. He challenged everything because of his argumentative. He named a Wrangler. He has a lot of contributions to biomechanics, although we mostly know him as an astronomer, if you will. He actually invented the telescope. Funny thing about Galileo is that, do you guys know that he spent the later part of his life under arrest, in house arrest. Did y'all know that? This guy was, in the time, you have to understand, he basically came up and he said, the earth moves around the sun. And they're like, no, that's not absolutely at all, because the Bible says, I don't know exactly where, but somewhere in the Bible it said that the earth doesn't move. And so because he said that, he was tried for heresy, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. Even after he invented a telescope and proved that he was absolutely right, the Roman people at the time were like, nope, nope, stay in jail, right? So that's the kind of guy this guy is. And so the play on words that I was using on my conversational piece about the Wrangler, the study of biomechanics, is that we all in the Farrier community should be more like this guy, right? And I'll get to that here in just a second. The study of biomechanics is ancient, and it has been examined by some of the greatest minds in history. Here's a little, just to kind of give you a heads up. 365 BC was Socrates talking about how we have to understand how our body works and that of other things, right? Aristotle, 350 BC, De Motu Animalium, he wrote the book. Jesus, 0 AD. So these guys were before Jesus talking about this. Galen, 160, Da Vinci, 1475, Galileo, 1594. We landed on the moon in 1969, and we are here today. So do you guys get the picture that I'm trying to put out there? Like, this stuff has been around for a hot minute. So if this stuff and the study of biomechanics has been around for a hot minute, why do we still get hung up on really basic, simple principles? Why do we get hung up on them? Why do we sit there and kick our heads around and all that? Okay. Gimmicks, fads, and snake oil salesmen. Now these are pretty cool. Do you guys remember the movie Tin Cup? You guys remember that? We walked in and she can't get her golf swing down right? So we're talking about like gimmicks, right? So instead of practice and hard work and going to the golf course and studying, she opted to do a gimmick and thought that that would get her where she needed to go. Do you guys remember the pet rock thing on the whole fads? Does anybody ever remember when that was kind of out? Yeah. And then snake oil salesman. So I'm not talking about anybody in this room, of course, right? We're not talking about that. But, you know, a gimmick is a trick or device intended to attract attention. A fad is intense and widely shared enthusiasm for something, especially one that is short-lived. And a snake oil salesman is somebody who deceives people in order to get money from them. So I'm not trying to beat anybody up, and I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything, but how many people in this room know of somebody in this business that is very much like that? Come on, raise your hands. Yeah, we're here. This is church, people. We're talking. Yeah. You know that guy or girl that when she opens her truck, he or she has every shoe possibly imaginable for anything and everything, and they don't even own an anvil? Right? And you ever see that one meme on there that says, and with this magic metal, I will fix your horse, right? Now, I'm not saying you got to be a blacksmith and build horseshoes. What I'm saying is probably don't need to reinvent the wheel on every single horse, right? What does this all mean? What am I trying to say? Facts cannot be argued. They have been proven. There are facts in the world of farriery. There are absolute, 100% guaranteed facts. There's books out there. These things have been proven. The problem with it is that oftentimes we don't open a book when we should. Oftentimes we do what? We open what? We open our mouth when we should be opening a book, right? I know it comes off hard sometimes, my bad. A fact is a thing that is known, proved to be true. That is literally the definition of that word. Fact is a thing that is known to be true. Synonyms include reality, actuality, certainty, and truth. So as Galileo Galilee strived for everybody to utilize facts with things like astronomy and biomechanics and the whole 9 yards, my whole platform, this whole lecture today is me standing up here saying that we should use facts every day. We should arm our farrier practices or barefoot practices or whatever your practice is that you're here. You should arm yourself with facts, right? You should arm yourself with facts. So I've often heard it said that we put 10 farriers in a room and you'll get 10 different answers for something. Why is that? Can anybody tell me why that is? I had this conversation with a few of you over the last few days when I asked simple questions like, where is the center of rotation on a foot? And I would get 5 or 6 different answers. But yet we talk about it when you're on Monday morning quarterbacking your shoe jobs and you're talking to your client and you're like, well, I'm just shoeing around the center of rotation. And then I look at you and say, okay, show me where this is at. And you go, well, then how are you shoeing around it if you don't know what it is? The center of rotation is a biomechanical term. It's biomechanical. It's designed where the 3 planes move across it and it doesn't go in motion. Horizontal plane, transverse plane, etc., etc. We could dive into that a little later. But the center of rotation is a part on the horse where during all 3 of these planar movements, it does not move. So that is a simple place. Dave Duckett showed it on the bottom of a foot, a general idea for all of us, but the center of rotation is not in the bottom of the foot. It's at the distal third of P2. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Are we arming ourselves with facts daily? Are we servicing our clientele? Are we using facts as our guidelines? How many people heard that argument on Facebook not long ago where toe clips create the crena? Did y'all see all that on Facebook? It was big, right? It was big. Everybody was like, oh my God, this crena is created by a toe. And then what's so funny is the people that were standing up there screaming at it the loudest, it was an absolute truth, are the same ones that you click on their stuff and they don't know. They're like I got horses when I was 50 because I was in my midlife crisis and you should listen to me now. That wasn't funny to nobody? Okay, that's cool. Swing and a miss? All right, that's fine. Swing and a miss. All right. Do we rely on facts and gimmicks? Are we snake oil salesmen? Do we hide our lack of skill? Oh, wait for me. I'm not trying to beat you up now. This isn't even for you guys. This is for the other people, right? Do we hide our lack of skill set, ability, or knowledge behind buzzwords and fancy products? Not you guys. You guys don't do that. I'm talking about those other guys, right? Products are important, but if every horse you shoe or you need something special, now I'm going to give you a little anecdotal evidence from me. Did you guys know that the very first horse I ever shod, I was like the best horseshoer ever? All you had to do was just talk to me. I would tell you that, right? Raise your hand if you're with me. When you first started shoeing horses, you had a lot of gimmicks in your truck. Is anybody else like this, or am I the only one? A couple people being honest. I like your style. Cool, beers on me later. All right, so I was that way, right? I was that way. When I first started shoeing horses, I used a lot of pads. I used a lot of special stuff, a lot of pour-ins, a lot of this, that, and the other. Can anybody guess why I was doing that? You could say it. Why was I doing it?
Lack of skill.
Because I was over-trimming feet a lot, right? I would take Fluffy down to the bottom of it. And then when the horse walked across the quarter, he could tell you if it was heads or tails. That's bad, right? And so what was happening is my lack of skill set was having to be covered up with products, right? And as we get better, the less products we need, or hypothetically. Now, I'm not beating nobody up. I know that some of you guys shoot a lot of really awesome performance horses and stuff, and you have to use some stuff to keep them going. Kudos to you. I'm not talking about that, right? Obviously, everybody in this room is not guilty. It's important to know words. We talk about words when we're all sitting around having a conversation, especially when that gin and tonic is flowing. Like, words start coming out, and people start using words like breakover and medial and lateral and abaxial and axial and all of these words. But then you sit there and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and they use a word and you have no idea if, like, you don't know that word, or you don't know if they're using that word correctly, or this, that, and the other. So I'm not going to go through every word in here, but what I wanted to cover with this slide is when talking about horses, when talking about biomechanics, when talking in general about farriery, we must know the words that we're using, because that way we all speak the same language, correct? We all realize that? So we have some really talented people that actually work with and in veterinary colleges, and they will tell you that they have to use that same proper terminology when dealing with vet students, because that way everybody's talking in the same language, correct? You guys agree with that? Everybody north-south? All right, cool. So breakover. Breakover is a measurement of time from when the heel leaves the ground until the toe enters the stride phase. Now it's funny is because when I Google that word, and you guys could all do it right now, you find a lot of different ideas behind that, right? So then what you have to do is on the last slide, when I cite my references, you'll see that I went to a lot of actual, like, the Wilson's theory of the shoulder, and I went to like Pilsner and some other people, and most of the actual accepted vernacular for breakover is that right there. It is a measurement of time from when the heel lifts off the ground to when the toe enters the stride phase. Can we all get behind that? Can we all get behind that? That that's what that is? Is there anybody in here that completely disagrees with that? So we're all on the exact same page. Breakover is from the heel, boom, goes forward. All right, cool. Pressure. When I'm dealing with horseshoers, I used to, because I didn't totally understand the world, people would say, well, I don't like all that shoe hanging out there. It puts pressure. Or it puts pressure on the inside of the foot, or pressure here, pressure that. And I just think, man, that is really not the right way to look at that word, but actually I was wrong. By looking at the actual definition of pressure, it says continual physical force exerted into an object by something in contact with it. So that changed my verbiage or how I would word things on that. Center of rotation, the point fixed to the body, undergoing planar movement that has zero velocity at a particular instant of time. There are three planes of motion in which the body can move: sagittal front to back, frontal side to side, and transversional, i.e. rotationally. It's the pivot point of the joint located at the distal third of P2. So if you look down the distal third of P2, you draw a circle of it. The center of that circle is the center of rotation. That is it. That is the center of rotation. So now you all know. Should somebody ever, and this is a biomechanical term. It does not change. It's always. So the length of that P2, it doesn't change. Where the center of rotation is looked at, it just changes it on that particular horse. Does that make sense? Like a longer bone, it's still there. You just got to go to it. All right. The center of articulation is the center of the distal condyle. So it's the rounded prominence of P2. From that center point, a vertical line is dropped perpendicular to the ground, and that is the center of articulation. So do you all understand exactly now where the center of rotation is and the center of articulation is? Do we know that now? We all got it? So if I handed you a fetlock model, you guys can look right at it and say, this is it. So next time you're talking to somebody and they tell you, well, I'm shooting around the center of rotation, they hold the bottom of the foot, you can say, well, that's not the center of rotation. That's stuff it's not. Which is, Dave did a great job of trying to connect the two, right? Okay, the other one I want to talk about real quick as we look way down is, well, there's three of them. Balance. If you look at balance, it says an even distribution of weight enabling someone or something to remain upright and steady. So when you trim a horse into balance and he's not falling over, you probably did a good job, right? Is that true? No, there's different types of balances, correct? We have AP balance, medial lateral balance, etc., etc. But that's the definition of the word. Static, lacking in movement, or dynamic, constantly changing. The reason why those are important when you're discussing biomechanics is because how many times have we looked at a horse, we shot it, it's standing on the ground, you're like, oh yeah, I did that. And then he walks off the cross ties and you hear him hit. Am I the only one who's done that? Nobody's ever hit? Okay, I'm that guy. All right, that's cool. I've done it, shot him, he's standing right there and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good shoe job. Then he walks off and he hits. As soon as he's walking off the shoeing rack, you're like, bring him back. Bring him back over here. All right, cranial means toward the head, caudal towards the tail. These are important things that you should know. Flexion, the act of bending or the condition of being bent, especially the limber joint. See that part where it says decreases the angle between two body parts? I think that's on your CF test. I think that one's part of the CF test. I think you should remember that. Extension, the act of extending, lengthening, or stretching out, the process of straightening, or the state of being straight. Those are important things. Everybody got your pictures? Good to Hogue? Moving on. All right, so let's talk about facts. One thing is that this is only like a 60-minute presentation on equine biomechanics in its entirety. You cannot break down biomechanics. So it was brought to me, like one of my peers said, you know what you should do is when you're giving this presentation, you should actually look at something and break that one thing down. And I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then I dove down that rabbit hole. No. You can't. There's hoof biomechanics, there's limb biomechanics, there's neck and back biomechanics. In other words, the entire horse works together and you cannot cover it in one time. You just cannot. So what I wanted to take the opportunity today is let you guys walk out of here with some well-known facts, some facts of biomechanics. And hopefully, again, like I talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, hopefully this sparks you into being more interested about learning more about it so that you can go on into your own education with it. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? It's like the first time you watch rugby and you're like, I have no idea what this is. But then you watch it a little more, you're like, oh yeah, I should probably learn more about rugby. I'm the only one who likes rugby. All right, cool. Right on. All right. Okay, the horse is extremely complex and it works in parts. To properly address biomechanics of the horse, we have to break down each part. We don't have time for that. So what I've done is I've racked my brain to come up with some absolute facts, things that I think are very important. So, biomechanics is directly affected by the framework or the skeleton of the horse, okay? You need to know that. That's number one right now. Biomechanics is directly affected by the skeletal system, the framework of the horse. So if Fluffy the Wonder Pony is built all jacked up, Fluffy's probably going to be jacked up. Can we agree with that? All right? All right? So that's what that means. Locomotion is achieved by a system of opposing muscles acting across joints. So right there I have my forearm flex, and what I like to do during this part of this discussion is I tell everybody, take your arm and bend it. Can you do that for me? Come on, get engaged. There you go. So bend your arm. When you did that, you know you want to do it, that a girl. So when you do that, you are flexing that muscle, right? Now, if you release that muscle and you no longer flex it anymore, will your arm fall? Let's just all let go of your muscle. Nope, arm doesn't fall. Why? Muscles can only contract. Make sense? So to bring this down, you have to contract the other muscle that brings that down. Does that make sense? So when you begin to look at horses and how they move, then you begin to look at muscles and how they have to cross joints in order to move the horse, you all of a sudden realize you have no idea how horses are actually moving, and it gets really confusing, right? How a horse actually turns force into locomotion and then conserves energy, and then actually the faster it's going, the more efficiently it moves. It's really crazy. Locomotion involves cyclical movement of the limb. This is a fact. So I broke that down. I got that out of a pretty important paper, and I had to break down the word cyclical. And do we know what cyclical means? Anybody? In a circle, right? Everybody's looking at me like this, like I'm not going to raise my hand. I'm just going to do this. All right, brother. So cyclical is a circle, right? Cyclical, but it doesn't just mean in a circle. It means something else also. Can anybody tell me what else it means? I'm sorry? And reoccurring. Cyclical and reoccurring. In other words, in a circle and over again. So then we have to deduce by that it says locomotion involves cyclical movement of the limb. So that means it's moving circularly and constantly and over again. Make sense? A muscle provides force, which turns into locomotion. And we have to break down the definition of force as strength or energy as an attribute of physical action or movement. So when we look at that one, again, these are facts. I wanted you to know that these are facts. These are unarguable. These are facts. So a muscle provides force. So we can deduce from that technically electricity from the brain fires the muscle, and then the muscle creates the movement, right? Technically we can say that. But we're going to say that muscles create the locomotion, right? So we can take those two slides and we can say that locomotion is cyclical and muscles make that happen. Right? Got that? All right, cool. A muscle acts to accelerate the limb. Right? So when a muscle turns on and tells Fluffy the Wonder Pony to move forward, then what must we have for Fluffy to slow down and stop? Muscles again, correct? I know I'm getting all these like weird looking faces like, what is he talking about? I'm trying to get people to understand how important it is about movement. Like we have to, muscles engage and start the horse moving, and then muscles stop the horse from moving. And the reason why that's important is, I'm going to tell you right now, I wasn't a very good horseshoer for a lot of time because I would just look at the bottom of the foot. And I thought that was God's gift to everything for me as a farrier. And now as I get older and I shoe more horses and I shoe more higher level horses, I'm starting to realize who's with me. Muscles and body condition play a huge role in how a horse moves and how their feet look and how we have to shoe them. Are y'all with me? Y'all with me on this? I'm telling you, it's big. So, fact, there's a significant and huge difference between the front end and the back end. Can we all agree with that? So a little later we're going to talk more about that, but I want you to think about this. The back end is like it's bolted to the frame. It's a hard axle. It is bolted to the frame, and the front end has got all kinds of independent steering. I want you to get that wrapped in your head right there, okay? Muscles moving in a rowing motion. Muscles attach bones via tendons. The origin and the insertion of a muscle determine the function, and muscles must move across one or more joints for locomotion. Does all that make sense about muscles right now? Can we all agree with that about muscles, or is there anything out there that you don't necessarily get behind? We're tracking? All right, cool. The forelimbs carry roughly 65% of the horse's weight. We can argue that, right? Can we argue that? Is it 65? Is it 68? Is it 67? It just depends on the conformation of the horse, right? That can change. But we can definitely say that a horse carries the majority of the weight on the front end, right? We could say that. Therefore, the function of forelimb is primarily weight bearing, and this is the example that I like to use of that. So, if the horse is taken off and the horse strides from the back end to the front end, and like look at race horses or any other kind of horse, when they go from standing still to moving, the front end goes where? Up or down? The front end goes up. Okay, so like a drag racing car, when it goes to take off and it's sitting there and idle, and all of a sudden it goes, All right, is there some form of shock absorber or something in the front that is pushing it up, or is the power from the back end so much that the front end has to do what? It has to get out of the way, basically, right? So for a horse, it has to get out of the way. And then as the power begins to come to its band and accelerate, if the horse doesn't take its front leg, and stick it out in front of them, what happens to the horse? It falls on its whole head, right? Okay, so by that, we can automatically deduce that the function of the forelimb is primarily weight bearing, but it also aids in deceleration of the horse's body and movement. What do I mean by that? When a horse is running, how many of y'all ride horses? Y'all ride a horse and you're running them all flat out, and all of a sudden you pick them up and begin to slow them down. What do you feel? I mean, on a reining horse, yeah, you might feel, but I'm talking about a horse that's really slowing down. You feel the front end start to break, right? So the front end, we know then that the front end helps with deceleration as well, right? You tracking? The fore and thoracic limbs are held to the body or barrel of the horse through fibrous muscles known as the thoracic sling. Is everybody in here familiar with the thoracic sling? Basically, it's a giant group of muscles that wrap around the front part of the horse and kind of hold them all together. The front part of the horse is not bolted to the frame. It just moves like this, right? The thoracic sling allows abduction, adduction, and these are not allowed by conventional joints. So let me break this down real quick. So like a reining horse's ability to do this and cross his legs when he's spinning, and a cutting horse's ability to get really down low like he's at, if the front end were bolted to the horse like the back end is, Fluffy couldn't do that. Does that make sense? The horse, it would be impossible. But because the horse is amazing and is built this way, it can do that, and it does it on a regular basis. And we all have the opportunity and the pleasure of shooting them. Tendons of the horse are very long and inelastic, while ligaments are much shorter and elastic. And you know, I found that to be a confusing topic in some places when I was researching all of this, and it got me understanding, like, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I would think that a tendon would have more elasticity. Am I the only one that thinks that way? Like, I would think that way. But then when I got to reading more into it, and Wilson's theory of the shoulder, which, by the way, if you guys are only going to read one thing that I cite, read Wilson's theory of the shoulder. It changed my whole thought process about horses moving. But anyways, he covers how, you know, the muscle originates and courses distat and turns into the tendon. If it had a whole lot of gnawing to it, the horse couldn't move as efficiently as it does. It would have too much stress, or too much flexion and not enough movement of the limb. So that's how they break it down in Wilson's theory of the shoulder. Does that make sense? Like, if that tendon had a whole lot of stretch to it, the horse couldn't move as efficiently. Interesting. Ligaments connect bone to bone. They provide stabilization and structure. They also act as anchors that resist the pull of tendons. Is that one self-explanatory, or do we need more talk about that? Does that make sense to everybody? The importance of a ligament? Ligaments load under pressure for the purpose of expansion, while a tendon loads for the purpose of contraction. How do we know that's absolutely positively true? Because muscles can only contract, and a tendon originates at the muscle, therefore that we know that a tendon only has a bit. So it loads knowing that it's going to contract. Interesting concept? I thought so. You're yawning. I see you yawning. I saw you yawn. You shouldn't do that. I saw you yawning. All right. That was a lot. What does all this mean? How am I on time right now? Does anybody know? I'm just kind of rocking and rolling. I don't know either. All right. What does it all mean? Let's break this down Barney style, as I think I like to. The horse moves thus. The front end is independent. The horse's forelimbs are connected to the horse, but they are not bolted to the frame. This creates the ability for movement in a wide range of motion. We talked about that. The hind limbs of the horse are in fact bolted to the frame. They have a narrow range of motion, similar to that of the wheels of a train, fast or slow. The movement doesn't change. I know that one's kind of wordy, but I want you to think about the back end of a horse like a locomotion, like on a train. They do this. Forward or backwards, it doesn't matter. They do this. Does that make sense? Y'all get that? That's how they work. Up higher. Now, that's how they work. The horse is an amazing animal. Its ability to turn force into locomotion and use that motion to store and release energy at just the right time. That's an absolute amazing feat. The horse creates efficient movement by using mechanical advantage. Mechanical advantage is a huge thing. Tendons become cables, sesamoids become fulcrums, hinges, and reciprocal mechanisms to oppose. So there's storing of energy, opposing joints, and everything gets moving that way, and it's a super interesting, cool thing. So is this where we're at right now? Lost, confused, like what are we all talking about here? Understanding equine biomechanics as a farrier is critical. What we do to the horse every day as farriers, it has a definite impact and effect on the cables and pulleys of their body. It has a definite cause and effect on the cables and pulleys of their body. Understanding a horse's movement is crucial when shoeing any horse, right? When shoeing any horse, understanding movement is crucial. But shoeing those upper level horses where movement is really, really important, we must be a little more diligent in what we are doing. Motion and normal function are complex, but they're a logical cascade of events. Does that make sense right there? Does that bullet make sense? Okay, motion and normal function they're complex. They're very challenging. But when you begin to study how a horse moves, it's a cascade of regular occurring events that are directly related to the horse's anatomic structure. Making sense? To conclude, now this is a bit wordy, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is kind of why I brought this whole thing up and why I made a class out of it. I think that we as farriers have to be like Galileo Galilee was. I think that we have to be the person that stands in front of somebody and says, why is that true? How is that the facts? You know, just because somebody says that this is the way that we do it doesn't make it right. Do you agree with that? You guys agree with that? We have to arm ourselves every day, because every day we go out to the dressage queens that know everything. We go to well, I'm not a horseshoer, but my grandpappy was, so I know what I'm talking about. Or the people that are like, well, I don't know how to shoe horses, but I know what right looks like. How many of y'all have to deal with those people? We have to deal with them on a regular day-to-day basis. And we cannot argue their conjecture with more conjecture. Does that make sense? We have to arm ourselves with facts. We have to. It's very important. So when somebody comes up to me and says, I think that horse's toe is too long, and you look at him and go, yeah, too long for what? Fluffy ain't tripping. That's probably not the right answer, right? It doesn't make us look very professional. But what is too long? And how? What are the parameters? We should know what those things are, and we should be able to vocalize that to the people that we work for. Do we agree with that? Right? We have to learn how to do that. How can we defend our stances on topics that we claim to be subject matter experts if we don't know what we're talking about? And I'm not trying to beat nobody up. I'm just saying, you know, we go out there every day and we're trying to shoot horses and we're trying to make a living. But there's people that we know, not us. Of course, all of us are perfect and we know everything, and I know that. But there's people out there that are making a living right now that they cannot tell you the names of the tendons, the ligaments. They can't tell you what a corium is. They can't tell you. Not that they don't know, but they're out there every day working on it, and we allow it. We're okay with that. As a professional body, we're okay with that. Is that okay? And then what happens is because that guy's probably a better snake oil salesman than you or me, that guy, and you, maybe I'm the only one, that guy will get away with it. How many of y'all have that? Y'all have anybody in your area that is like, oh yeah, now hands popped up. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be that guy. That dude's a hack, right? And we know it, but he charges more and has more clients. Why? Because he's got that gift. But what he's selling is snake oil, because snake oil is easy to sell, right? It slices, dices, cuts, cures everything, breakovers, perfect, everything. He knows how to talk those words, right? Right? How do we combat that? Facts. That's all you can do is come at him with facts. You agree with that? Lee, do you agree with that? You guys all agree with that? These are the references. And most of the time, this is just a page that nobody really cares about. But for some of you, I'd like for you to take your phone out and take a picture of these references. This is pretty good stuff. I tried to do the best I could with the APA format because I know some really smart people are going to be judging me today. There's some interesting stuff right there. The one that I have to tell you about that is really cool. Do you see that one that says, where's that right here? This one right here, Wilson. Do you see that one right there? That right there changed my life as far as how a horse moves in the front end. Reading that paper changed my whole life as far as how horses carry their front end. That was I believe, a thesis paper or something for him to get his fellowship. There's FW. And then the top one, the horse in motion, anatomy and physiology of the equine locomotion. That's a $400 book. I bought it. You can borrow it. And then some of these, like the CK12 Organization of Foundation, this is a great reference if you're just wanting to learn things about like what mechanical advantage is, what force is, what this and that and the other. It breaks it down like Barney style. I mean, like 5th grade level, so that I could understand it. And so that's a really cool organization to get behind. And then animal locomotion, B-weaner, that was a really cool context because it talks a lot about how the back end affects horses or animals and movement. So this is my presentation for you today, and I wanted to open up the floor to a couple conversations or questions since we're standing right here. I think we have about 10 or so minutes to go. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
When you said the ligaments load up for expansion, what do you mean by that?
A ligament loads up for expansion. So, as per Pilner, what is described is when the horse is loading and the body weight is loading, the joint compresses this way and your ligament expands and loads for that. So that way when the horse is coming up off the limb, everything comes back and it stabilizes the limb from vibration and movement as it's coming up and over. And so that's written in that particular book right there, the Pilner and Davies, the 2002 model. That was quoted in that. And then she's got a diagram in it of how it goes to that. So again, when the limb is loading, there's compression of the joint and the ligament expands. And then as the joint unloads, if you will, the ligament holds everything and stabilizes that whole bony column. That's how she talks. Any other questions? Yes, sir, you, sir. That's a great question. He talks about how he works for a couple vets, and every time he goes there, they all say the same thing. Gotta bring the toe back, gotta bring the heels up. And vets are stupid, right? Those guys are dumb. They don't know anything, right? Wrong. Some of my best friends are veterinarians. They have to know it, but they're not farriers. Not all of them. Some of them are. They have to know it. The truth of the matter is how many in here, when you first started shooting horses, you didn't touch the heels, and then you went through that phase where you were just a heel raper. Like, you were like, yeah, get back your heels, and then you finally found that happy medium. Where y'all at? Who's with me on the happy medium now? Anybody with me on that? Okay, the toe thing, all right? How about this? I would take and put that toe on there, like I would rape my heels back, and I would bring the toe back, and I'd set it back there, and then dub it all off. Was I the only one in the country that did that? Yeah, you're right there. And then all of a sudden you graduate. Well, where are you that in your trim, you actually look at the toe and you say to yourself, man, I don't even know anymore. Do I follow the white line of this foot? Is the white line lying? Is that coffin bone really shaped like that? What do I do? Is anybody else there now? I mean, that's a natural progression of farrier, right? Like when you first start, you know everything. And then the more that you know, the more you begin to understand that you don't know. Is that right? I can't be the only one. Maybe I am. So to answer your question, why is that the case? Because generally by the time the horse gets to the vet clinic, somebody else has already been not doing a very good job. Do you agree with that? Does everybody agree with that? There's a reason why that horse has got there. Okay? I read a study one time said that there was roughly 45,000 farriers in the United States of America. This is full-time farriers in the United States of America. And at the time, there was like 680 journeyman farriers. Right? So we can deduce from those numbers that there's probably not a lot of education in this field, right? Can we agree with that? So for every 100 horseshoers that you meet on the street doing their thing, is the education level there? No, probably not. But to answer your question, and Matt's in the back and he's a vet, he can tell you, but when the horses get there, they fall underneath his insurance, like now they fall underneath his thing. He has to affect change, right? He has to do something because that's what they're there for. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times that's what they need. A lot of time horses need their heels lifted up and a toe brought back when they're at the vet clinic. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question for you? Did I? Any other questions at all? Yes, sir, you, sir.
I'm just wondering, like, that was kind of a lengthy conclusion, like just in one or two sentences, what the takeaway message is.
So the takeaway was, as I spoke, is that I wanted to compare farriery and farriers to the Wrangler, to Galileo Galilee. And what I wanted everybody to do was to say, you know what, I shouldn't just do things and not know the answer for them. That I should look at everything as a fact and a provable fact, and that I should operate myself that way. And we should not be the kind of people that just do something just because. So that's the takeaway from this whole thing, as I mentioned earlier in the discussion. You guys remember on the first slide or two, I told you it was a conversational piece. You guys remember that? That the whole idea of this thing was to hopefully ignite an interest in biomechanics and an interest in the movement of the horse, and perhaps take away more of a study about it. I had a really cool one too that was like on the learning process, and we didn't do that one, but it was cool. Is there any other questions at all? Nothing at all. I'd be more than happy to answer anything you want. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's a whole argument. I mean, that's a whole argument because there's some horseshoers that believe that, like, oh man, we should look at the entire horse. And there's other horseshoers, and I'm kind of guilty of that, that I just kind of, I work from the hairline down, right? I mean, I do know that what we do has an absolute effect on the whole horse. I know that. I know that. But, I mean, I don't get wrapped up. I just don't. Because I don't think that I mean, I know what we do has some effect on it, but I don't think it's as grandiose as what a lot of us want to believe. I really don't. And there's nothing that can prove it. I mean, I'd like to. I wish there was a research paper or something done that shows that what we do on the bottom of the foot absolutely affects, you know, the coxofemoral joint. There's nothing up there that says that. So, anything else? Yes, sir. Yeah, you know what? I should have brought a diagram for that. For that, I apologize. So the center of rotation. If you know that there's P1, P2, and P3, correct? So the center of rotation is located on the distal third. So like you take and you break that bone down into threes, right? Draw a circle, and in the center of that circle, that is the center of rotation. So the center of rotation is the most forward part of P2, where it connects to P3. Okay, if you were to draw a line and drop a plumb line down perpendicular to the ground, that is the center of articulation. That make sense? Thank you, sir. Anything else at all? Yes, sir.
Can you find that point on any other radiographic image?
I'm sorry?
Can you find either one of those points on another radiographic image other than a medial lateral?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, I don't see why not. But the thing about radiographs, to answer your question, is that when I looked it up and how I looked it up, it was always shown in the lateral view to find that. But my assumption would be then that, yeah, but the problem with radiographs is the imaging and the resonation expands and contracts. So there's not often times that we actually look at a radiograph that is an exact replication of the bone that we're looking at. Do you agree with that? So that's another challenging part about the center of rotation. Like, I guess we'd have to shoot Fluffy in the head and dissect the limb and then, you know, to get an actual example. But, yeah. He asked if there was another radiographic view other than just a lateral view of the pasture for us to find the center of rotation. So that's Duckett's dot, and that's not right. So are y'all familiar with like Dave Duckett and Duckett's dot and all that? Y'all familiar with that? So Dave did a really good job of basically saying that, you know, the widest part of the foot, the bridge of the foot and all that is basically how we correlate to the center of rotation. It's a really good landmark. Which is why I think it stands the test of time. Like, how long ago did Dave come up with that? I mean, you're old, you know. Right, and it's still being taught and used today, right? So I think that it's a good testament. So I hope to have answered all your questions. I hope that I gave you at least an interesting presentation. I hope that it was not boring. I hope that you found it fun. But seriously though, take a picture of these and like look into some of that. Some of these writings really did change kind of my view on how horses turn force into locomotion, and especially the Wilson one about how the horse uses its front end. I found that just to be like overwhelming in some ways. Cool? If there's no other questions, then I'm gonna. Yes, sir. That's an interesting. So the whole idea behind the center of rotation is that the horse in its movement on the planes, right, we talked about the 3 planes, and it was a biomechanical, basically, it's a biomechanical phenomena at that particular point that under the 3 planes that particular thing doesn't move, right? So what it's basically saying is that everything else around it moves and it acts almost like an axle, if you will. Like everything has to move around it. So the whole idea, the reason why I brought that word up and everything else was because how many times are you talking to people and they say that they shoe around the center of articulation, the center of rotation? I mean, all the time. I hear it all the time. But then when you ask them, where is it at? They don't know. So the whole context of me bringing that up was like the slide was called like words are important, you should know them. Like that's the context of it. If you're going to use it as a buzzword, then you should at least know where it's at. Does that make sense? That was me being kind of like the whole Wrangler guy. right? Don't just say it to say it. You should know what it is. You agree? Cool. Any other questions? Anything else? Yes, sir. I have a lot of thoughts. What I found the best thing for me to do when I was talking to my clients is I took my apron off, hung it on my anvil, went and sat down, and I just talked to them about their concerns. I got to be honest with you. I think that's the one way that a lot of people beat us at our game is we're good farriers, so we're really busy. And then oftentimes what I find that the best thing for me in my business is I take my apron off, hang it on my anvil, and I'll just go sit over there and address concerns. And sometimes I don't get home until late. Yeah, I just communicate. Because that's the one thing that person will do. That person will talk their ear off. So it's not really part. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then who was it that said this quote that, like, if you really know something, then you can explain it to a 3-year-old. Who was it that said that? Or in a fashion where a 3-year-old can understand it? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's a quote that says that. Like, if you truly know a topic, you can explain it to a 3-year-old. I think that's the other thing that we have to do. I think that we really have to know our stuff. That way we can properly explain it. Anything else at all? Any other questions? Yes, sir?
Does center of rotation change in a healthy foot versus a non-healthy foot?
Center of rotation has nothing to do with the foot.
Say if P3 is rotated or if there's some elongation
has nothing to do with the foot.
Or something.
Has nothing to do with the foot. Center of rotation has everything to do with the P2. But what we use on the bottom of the foot, absolutely, that changes during a rotated horse or a laminated horse, something like that. Like that changes. But the center of rotation, it's just a biomechanical term. So no, if a foot is rotated, it doesn't affect center rotation. That's kind of the whole idea about center rotation, right? Is that it doesn't change. That's what makes it kind of cool. Anything else? Now I think I should have put more slides about center rotation up there. I really think I should have. You're like, dang, missed. If that's it, that's all you got? Yes, sir, you, sir.
Thanks for speaking so we can understand you.
What do you mean?
Have you been to some of the other sessions?
Oh, yeah. If you know me, you know that I work really hard to hold back like F-bombs and really, just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. No, I do that too. Like, I've been in those seats, right? I've been right there, and this is my privilege to let you hear for the 3rd or 4th time, I think. And I've been there though. I've sat there, and I've looked up at the screens, and I thought, and I'm just gonna be real honest. I thought, what does that have to do with anything that I'm doing in my life right now? You know what I mean? And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to bring something like, here you go. And even if you didn't get it, even if I didn't do a very good job of explaining it to you, there's the references, and by all means, go after it on your own. You know what I mean? If I didn't do a very good job, then get after it. You know what I mean? And then perhaps you could teach me something else. You know, I'm always down to learn. Steve, anything? Mr. Krause, anything? You're good? Well, I know if I had holes in it, you'd let me know, brother. Thanks, partner. Appreciate it. So if that is all, Tom, I'm good. Anybody else? Yes, sir. The difference between I'm sorry, Paul? The function of So the deep digital flexor muscle originates, it's got 3 bolting points on it where it attaches. It courses distat and inserts into the semilunar crest of the coffin bone. So the superficial flexor muscle has a completely different point of origin and a completely different point of insertion. So they act in opposite of each other. The difference in the function of the two? Of the flexor muscles? Well, they flex the limb. So the deep digital, its job is to bring the P3 up. And then the superficial, is that what you were talking about? And then the superficial flexor muscle. Paul, let me talk to you after this. I'm trying to figure out exactly what you're trying to get at. I'll come talk to you in a second. Is that all? Then I'm done. Thank you very much for your time.